I never thought I'd be at war with my HOA. But that's exactly what happened when I found 11 garden sheds on my property that definitely weren't mine. It started on a Saturday morning in April when I was enjoying my coffee on the back deck of my home in Crestwood Hills, a suburban neighborhood just outside of Portland, Oregon. The spring air was crisp, birds were chirping, and I was looking forward to a peaceful weekend of yard work. That's when I noticed something peculiar at the far edge of my 2-acre lot. A small green garden shed that I was certain hadn't been there the day before. My name is Gabriel Edwards, and I've owned this property for nearly 8 years. After working as a civil engineer for 20 years, I had saved enough to buy my dream home, a spacious craftsman on a generously sized lot backing up to a protected forest area. The neighborhood was governed by the Crestwood Hills Homeowners Association, which I initially hadn't minded. Their rules seemed reasonable, and I appreciated the well-maintained common areas. I set my coffee down and walked across my lawn toward the mysterious shed. As I got closer, I noticed it wasn't just one shed. There were actually 3 identical green garden sheds placed in a neat row along my property line. Each was about 8 feet by 10 feet, with small windows and padlocked doors. "What the hell?" I muttered to myself, circling the first shed. There was no note, no explanation, nothing to indicate who had put them there or why. I immediately pulled out my phone and called Patricia Keller, our HOA president. Patricia was in her 60s and had been running the association with an iron fist for over a decade. She was known for her by-the-book approach and uncompromising enforcement of community standards. "Patricia, it's Gabriel Edwards from 1842 Pine Crest Drive. Someone has placed 3 garden sheds on my property overnight. Do you know anything about this?" There was a slight pause before she responded. "Oh, Gabriel, yes. The board approved temporary storage for the community garden supplies. We sent out an email last week about it." I frowned. I never received any email, and more importantly, no one asked for my permission to put structures on my private property. "It was in the newsletter," Patricia said dismissively. "We need somewhere to store the equipment for the summer gardening program. Your lot has the most unused space backing up to the forest area. It's just for a few months. Patricia, you can't just put sheds on someone's private property without their explicit permission. That's trespassing and possibly illegal." "Now, Gabriel," Patricia's voice took on that condescending tone I'd heard her use with others who challenged her authority. "The HOA bylaws give us access rights for community improvements. Section 8, Paragraph 4, if you'd care to review it. These sheds are for the benefit of everyone in Crestwood Hills." I was about to argue further when I noticed a truck pulling up to the edge of my property. 2 men in Crestwood Hills HOA polo shirts were unloading another garden shed. "There are people delivering another shed right now," I said, my voice rising. "This has to stop immediately." "The deliveries were scheduled for this weekend," Patricia replied coolly. "I need to go now. We can discuss this at the next board meeting in 2 weeks if you still have concerns." Before I could protest further, she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, watching in disbelief as the men positioned the 4th shed alongside the others. "Excuse me," I called out, approaching them. "Who authorized you to place these sheds here?" One of the men, a stocky guy with a name tag reading Frank, looked up. "HOA orders, sir." "We're just doing what we were told. Got paperwork right here." He handed me a work order signed by Patricia Keller and Karen Nichols, the HOA vice president. I examined the document, which detailed the placement of 11 garden sheds on the unused portion of HOA community land adjacent to Forest Preserve. The problem was, this wasn't HOA land. It was my land. I had the deed and property survey to prove it. "This is private property," I explained. "Not HOA land. You can't place these sheds here without my permission." Frank looked uncomfortable. "Look, sir, we're just following orders. You'll need to take it up with the HOA board. We've got 7 more sheds to deliver today." 7 more. I was incredulous. No, this stops now. I want these removed immediately. Can't do that without authorization from Miss Keller, Frank replied. Again, sir, I suggest you contact the board. I watched helplessly as they drove away, knowing they'd be back with more sheds. I immediately went inside and pulled out my property documents, confirming what I already knew. The land was mine, extending all the way to the tree line at the forest edge. I also dug up the HOA bylaws Patricia had mentioned. While there was indeed a provision allowing the HOA access for maintenance of utilities and common areas, it explicitly excluded the placement of structures on private property without written consent from the owner. Over the next several hours, I called Patricia repeatedly, but she didn't answer. I left increasingly frustrated messages. I also sent emails to the entire HOA board outlining the situation and demanding immediate removal of the sheds. No one responded. By Sunday evening, as promised, there were 11 garden sheds arranged in a tidy row along my property line. I'd attempted to stop the deliveries several times, but the workers simply referred me back to the HOA board. I'd even called the local police, who informed me that this was a civil matter between me and the HOA. Monday morning, I took the day off work and visited the office of Gordon Reynolds, a real estate attorney I'd used when purchasing the property. "They did what?" Gordon exclaimed after I explained the situation. He was a tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a reputation for being thorough. "Put 11 garden sheds on my property without permission," I repeated, showing him photos I'd taken. "They claim it's for community garden storage, but they never asked me. They just did it." Gordon shook his head. "This is a clear violation of your property rights. The HOA has no authority to place structures on your land without consent, regardless of what their bylaws say. State law supersedes HOA rules. So what do? First, we send a formal cease and desist letter, giving them 72 hours to remove the sheds. If they fail to comply, we can file for an injunction and potentially sue for trespassing." "That sounds like it could take weeks or months," I said, frustrated. "Those sheds are on my property now." Gordon leaned forward. "Gabriel, I understand your frustration, but I recommend following the legal process. Anything else might complicate your position." I nodded, though I was already forming another plan in my mind. "Send the letter, Gordon, but make it 48 hours, not 72. That afternoon, I received a voicemail from Karen Nichols, the HOA vice president. Karen was a stereotypical suburban busybody in her mid-50s, known for patrolling the neighborhood looking for rule violations to report. "Mr. Edwards," her message began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "I understand you're upset about the community garden storage solution. Patricia asked me to reach out. The board feels this is a wonderful opportunity for you to contribute to our neighborhood's beautification efforts. The sheds will only be there through September, and we'd be happy to recognize your contribution in the neighborhood newsletter. Please call me back so we can discuss this amicably." I didn't return her call. Instead, I spent the evening researching HOA laws in Oregon and speaking with neighbors I trusted. Many were surprised to hear about the sheds and confirmed they'd received no notification about placing storage units on private property. Tuesday afternoon, I finally received a response to my emails not from Patricia, but from Karen. The email was addressed to me and copied to all board members. "Dear Mr. Edwards, the board has discussed your concerns regarding the temporary garden storage units. As previously communicated, these sheds are essential for our summer beautification program. The placement was approved unanimously by the board in accordance with Section 8 of our bylaws. We are disappointed by your unwillingness to cooperate with community initiatives. The board has decided to apply a special assessment of $150 per month to your HOA dues as compensation for the land use. This is significantly less than commercial storage rates would cost the association. We trust this resolves your concerns. Regards, Karen Nichols, Vice President, Crestwood Hills HOA." I was livid. Not only were they refusing to remove the sheds, but they were now charging me for the privilege of having my property used without permission. I forwarded the email to Gordon, who responded within the hour, confirming that such an assessment was completely illegal. The formal cease and desist letter was delivered to the HOA board Wednesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, I noticed increased activity around my property. Neighbors were bringing gardening equipment rakes, shovels, bags of soil, and even small gardening tractors and storing them in the sheds. Karen herself was there, directing people and making a show of organizing the community resource. I approached her as she was unlocking one of the sheds. "Karen, you received my attorney's letter this morning, correct?" She barely looked at me. "Yes, and the board's attorney will respond in due course. In the meantime, we're proceeding with our community garden program as planned." "Those sheds are on my private property without my consent," I said, keeping my voice level despite my rising anger. "You have 48 hours to remove them or I'll take further legal action." Karen turned to face me fully, her hands on her hips. "Mr. Edwards, your attitude is disappointing. Everyone else in the neighborhood understands the importance of community cooperation. Perhaps if you'd attended more HOA meetings, you'd appreciate the value of these programs." She gestured toward the growing collection of garden equipment. "This represents a significant investment by our community. That's when an idea struck me, an idea that might resolve this faster than any legal process. I decided to change tactics." "You know what, Karen, you're right," she looked surprised. "I am. Yes, I haven't been very community-minded. Tell you what, since the sheds are already here and you've gone to all this trouble, I'll stop fighting it for now." Karen's expression shifted from confrontational to smugly victorious. "Well, I'm glad you've come around. I'll inform the board of your cooperation. One thing, though," I added. "Since these sheds are on my property, I'd like a key to each one, for safety reasons. It's my land, after all, and I'm responsible for anything that happens on it." She hesitated, clearly not having expected this request. "It's a reasonable ask," I pressed. "I'm allowing community storage on my private property. The least you can do is give me access to the structures on my own land." Karen reluctantly agreed, probably figuring this was an easy concession to get me to back down from legal action. "I'll have a set of keys made for you by tomorrow." True to her word, Karen delivered a ring of 11 keys to my house Thursday morning. I thanked her politely and assured her I was happy to be helping the community. Over the next week, more and more gardening equipment appeared in the sheds. Some items were clearly community property professional-grade tools and equipment with Crestwood Hills HOA stenciled on them. But I also noticed many items that seemed to be personal property from board members' homes. Patricia's riding lawn mower, Karen's extensive collection of ceramic garden gnomes, and what appeared to be patio furniture from board member Michael Wilson's recent backyard renovation. I carefully documented everything going into the sheds, taking photos and making inventory lists. I also installed security cameras overlooking my property, focusing on the shed area. Meanwhile, Gordon informed me that the HOA's attorney had responded to our cease and desist letter, claiming that the HOA had easement rights based on a decades-old community plan. Gordon assured me this claim was baseless and recommended proceeding with the injunction. "Actually," I told him, "hold off on filing. I have another approach in mind." Gordon sounded concerned. "Gabriel, whatever you're planning, make sure it's legal. Don't give them ammunition to use against you." "Trust me," I replied. "I'm going to use their own tactics against them, completely within the law." 2 weeks after the sheds appeared, I executed my plan. I hired a professional surveyor to mark the exact boundaries of my property, placing stakes with bright orange flags at regular intervals. I made sure to schedule this for a Saturday morning when many neighbors would be out and about. The surveyor, a methodical man named Harold, took several hours to complete the job, attracting considerable attention from curious neighbors. When Karen inevitably appeared, she approached with visible concern. "What's going on here?" she demanded. I smiled pleasantly. Just confirming my property boundaries, Karen. Always good to know exactly what you own, don't you think? She eyed the surveyor's equipment suspiciously. The HOA needs to approve any modifications to property lines. No modification, I clarified. Just verification of the existing boundaries, which I'm entitled to do at any time. You might be interested to see the results. The survey confirmed what I already knew: the sheds were entirely on my property, not on any HOA common land or easement area. Harold provided official documentation, which I had notarized that same day. Sunday morning, I put the next phase of my plan into action. I placed a large sign at the front edge of my property, visible from the main road. Edwards Community Storage, 24-hour access for Crestwood Hills residents. By mid-afternoon, Karen was at my door, fuming. What is the meaning of that sign? You can't operate a business from a residential property. It's not a business, I explained calmly. I'm not charging anything. I'm simply informing the community that I've generously allowed my property to be used for storage, as you pointed out was important for community cooperation. Those sheds are for the garden program only, Karen insisted. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because I've noticed quite a lot of personal items being stored there: your garden gnome collection, Patricia's riding mower, Michael's patio set. If this is truly for community gardening, why are board members using it for private storage? Karen's face reddened. Those are temporarily being stored until they can be properly placed in the community garden areas. Of course, I nodded, not bothering to hide my skepticism. Well, since the HOA has established that my property is available for community use without my explicit consent, I'm simply extending that same courtesy to all residents. Equal access for everyone, isn't that fair? This is not what the board approved, Karen sputtered. The board never had the authority to approve placing sheds on my private property in the first place, I countered. But since you've set the precedent, I'm simply following your lead. After Karen left, I sent an email to all Crestwood Hills residents, having compiled a list from various neighborhood communications over the years. Dear neighbors, as you may have noticed, the HOA has placed 11 storage sheds on my property at 1842 Pine Crest Drive. While this was done without my permission, I've decided to embrace the spirit of community sharing that our HOA board is promoting. Therefore, I'm making these storage facilities available to all Crestwood Hills residents on an equal basis. If you need space to store gardening equipment, seasonal items, or other belongings, please feel free to utilize the community sheds on my property. For access information, please contact me directly. Sincerely, Gabriel Edwards. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of neighbors replied, many expressing surprise that the sheds had been placed without my consent, and others eagerly requesting storage space. Several mentioned their own frustrations with the HOA board's high-handed tactics over the years. Monday morning, I woke to find Patricia Keller herself standing at my front door. At 64, Patricia had the intimidating presence of someone used to getting her way. Her steel gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her thin lips were pressed into a tight line of disapproval. Mr. Edwards, she began without preamble, your actions are creating chaos in our community. That sign must come down immediately, and you need to stop telling residents they can use HOA property. Good morning to you too, Patricia, I replied. I'm not telling people they can use HOA property. I'm telling them they can use the storage facilities that have been placed on my private property, a fact confirmed by a professional survey just this weekend. I handed her a copy of the survey results. As you can see, all 11 sheds are well within my property boundaries. Patricia barely glanced at the document. The placement of those units was approved by the board for community use. Yes, and I'm continuing that community use by making them available to all residents equally, not just board members storing their personal items. Her eyes narrowed. You're being deliberately difficult. Those sheds are for the garden program supplies only. Then why is your riding lawn mower in shed number 4? And why is Karen's collection of garden gnomes taking up all of shed number 7? Those aren't community garden supplies. Patricia's expression hardened. This conversation is pointless. The board will be meeting tonight to discuss your violation of HOA rules. Expect formal notification of fines by tomorrow morning. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Before you go, Patricia, you should know that I've documented everything the unauthorized placement of structures on my property. The board members using them for personal storage and all our communications. I've also consulted with my attorney, who confirms that what the HOA has done constitutes trespassing and possibly conversion of property. He's prepared to file not just against the HOA but against board members personally. That gave her pause. She turned back slowly. Are you threatening legal action against the board? I'm stating facts, I replied calmly. I have tried to resolve this amicably, but you've left me little choice. Over the next few days, a steady stream of neighbors came to utilize the community storage I'd offered. I provided access and kept meticulous records of who was storing what. Many shared their own stories of run-ins with the HOA board, particularly with Karen, who had a reputation for selective enforcement of rules strict with most residents but mysteriously lenient with friends and allies. On Thursday, I received the threatened notification of HOA fines. $500 for unauthorized signage and $250 per day for improper use of community resources. The letter, signed by Patricia, demanded immediate payment and removal of my sign. I responded with a letter of my own, copied to all board members and my attorney. Dear Crestwood Hills HOA Board, I am in receipt of your notification of fines dated date. I categorically reject these fines as they are predicated on the false assertion that the storage sheds on my property are community resources. As the enclosed professional survey confirms, these structures were placed entirely on my private property without my consent. This constitutes trespassing under Oregon state law. The fact that board members have been using these structures for personal storage rather than the stated community garden purpose further undermines your position. I demand the following. 1. Immediate removal of all 11 sheds from my property. 2. Restoration of the land to its original condition. 3. Written acknowledgement of the trespass. 4. Compensation for unauthorized use of my property in the amount of $500 per shed per week, totaling $5,500 to date. If these demands are not met within 72 hours, I will proceed with legal action against the HOA and board members individually. Sincerely, Gabriel Edwards. The response came not from Patricia or Karen, but from Gregory Nelson, a board member I'd had little interaction with previously. He requested a private meeting to discuss a reasonable resolution. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop the following day. Gregory was a pragmatic man in his early 60s who had recently joined the board. Over coffee, he admitted that the board had overstepped. Between us, Gabriel, I voted against this shed plan from the beginning, he confided. But Patricia and Karen pushed it through, claiming they had legal authority under the bylaws. They don't, I said firmly. I know that now, Gregory nodded. Several board members are concerned about potential personal liability. Patricia insisted we were on solid legal ground, but your survey and attorney's assessment have made many of us nervous. So what are you proposing? I'm unofficially feeling out whether there's a compromise to be reached before our emergency board meeting tonight. I considered this. My position is simple. The sheds need to go, the fines need to be withdrawn, and I want a formal apology. I'm even willing to waive my demand for compensation if this is resolved quickly. Gregory seemed relieved. That seems reasonable. Would you be willing to give us 2 weeks to relocate the sheds and their contents? Some of the garden program supplies are quite valuable, and we'd need to find alternate storage. 1 week, I countered. and all personal items belonging to board members must be removed within 48 hours. We shook hands on this tentative agreement, which Gregory promised to present to the board that evening. Later that night, Gregory called to inform me that the board had rejected our proposed compromise. Patricia and Karen had convinced a majority that yielding to my demands would set a dangerous precedent for other homeowners to challenge HOA authority. They're doubling down. Gregory sounded exhausted. Patricia is now claiming adverse possession rights based on the sheds being there. I couldn't help but laugh. Adverse possession requires years of occupation, not weeks, and it requires that the occupation be hostile, actual, open, notorious, exclusive, and continuous. They fail on multiple counts, especially since I've been actively contesting their presence from day one. I know, Gregory sighed. I tried explaining that. 3 of us voted to accept your terms, but we were outvoted 4-3. I appreciate your effort, I told him, but it looks like we'll have to do this the hard way. The next morning, I implemented the final phase of my plan. I had printed large, professionally made signs that I posted at each shed. Notice, this structure has been placed on private property without the owner's consent. All contents must be removed within 24 hours. After that time, the property owner will begin charging standard commercial storage rates of $50 per day per item. Items not claimed will be considered abandoned after 30 days and disposed of in accordance with Oregon state law. I also sent a mass email to all residents explaining the situation in detail, attaching copies of the survey, my correspondence with the board, and relevant sections of Oregon property law. I invited anyone with items stored in the sheds to contact me directly to arrange retrieval. The community response was immediate and largely supportive. Many residents were troubled by the board's actions and the apparent use of community resources for board members' personal benefit. By midday, several neighbors had come to remove their stored items, apologizing for the situation and thanking me for my patience. Karen appeared around 3 p.m., demanding access to her shed to retrieve her garden gnomes. I politely provided the key, reminding her of my 24-hour deadline and subsequent storage fees. She worked in grim silence, making multiple trips to her car with armloads of ceramic figurines. "You know," I remarked conversationally as she struggled with a particularly large gnome, "all of this could have been avoided if the board had simply asked my permission before placing sheds on my property." Karen glared at me. "You would have said no." Actually, I might not have. I support community initiatives. What I don't support is having my property rights ignored and then being charged a special assessment for the privilege. She didn't respond, just continued loading her gnomes into her SUV. By the next morning, most of the personal items had been removed, though the community gardening equipment remained. Patricia hadn't appeared to claim her riding mower, so I sent her a specific email reminding her of the impending storage fees. At precisely 24 hours after posting my notices, I changed the locks on all 11 sheds. I then sent another email to the board. As notified, the grace period for free storage has ended. All items remaining in the sheds on my property are now subject to commercial storage rates of $50 per item per day. A detailed inventory is attached. Current total daily storage fees, $4,750. To arrange payment and retrieval of items, please contact me directly. This finally prompted action. Within hours, I received notice that an emergency HOA board meeting had been called for that evening, and all residents were invited to attend. The meeting would be held in the community center, and the agenda had only one item: resolution of 1842 Pine Crest Drive storage issue. The community center was packed that evening. Nearly half the neighborhood had turned out, an unprecedented attendance for an HOA meeting. Patricia called the meeting to order, her voice tight with controlled anger. "We're here to address the disruptive actions taken by Gabriel Edwards regarding community storage facilities," she began. Gregory interrupted. Point of order, Patricia. Those aren't community storage facilities. They're sheds placed on Gabriel's private property without his permission, as confirmed by a professional survey. Murmurs of agreement spread through the room. Patricia tapped her gavel sharply. The board acted within its authority under the bylaws, she insisted. Section 8 gives you access for maintenance of utilities and common areas, I interjected, standing up. It doesn't give you the right to place structures on private property or use those structures for board members' personal storage. Several residents applauded. A woman named Gina Nelson stood up. I've reviewed the bylaws carefully, and Gabriel is correct. The board overstepped its authority, and I'd like to know why board members were using these supposedly community sheds for personal storage. Patricia's face reddened. Certain items were temporarily stored while awaiting placement in the community garden. Your riding lawn mower, Patricia, someone called out. And Karen's 100 garden gnomes, those were for the community garden. Karen jumped to her feet. This is getting out of hand. The board has acted in the best interests of Crestwood Hills, as we always do. By trespassing on private property, I asked calmly. By imposing fines on me for objecting to that trespass. By charging me a special assessment for the use of my own land. The meeting devolved into heated debate, with residents increasingly vocal in their criticism of the board's actions. Finally, Gregory managed to restore order. I propose the following resolution, he announced. 1. The HOA acknowledges that the sheds were placed on Gabriel Edwards' property without proper authorization. 2. All sheds will be removed within 5 days at the HOA's expense. 3. All fines and special assessments against Mr. Edwards are rescinded. 4. The board issues a formal apology to Mr. Edwards. I second the motion, called Gina Nelson. Patricia looked like she might explode. This is outrageous. The board cannot be held hostage by one uncooperative homeowner. Actually, I countered, I think you'll find I've been quite cooperative. I allowed the community to retrieve their belongings safely. I've documented everything meticulously. I've even offered to waive my right to compensation for the unauthorized use of my property if this matter is resolved promptly. Let's vote, Gregory suggested. All in favor of the resolution. The room erupted in a chorus of aye votes, not just from the board but from the residents as well. Opposed, only Patricia and Karen voiced opposition. The motion passes, Gregory declared. Now, regarding the items currently locked in the sheds. I'll waive the storage fees if all items are removed along with the sheds within 5 days, I offered. And I'll provide access tomorrow for retrieval of any urgently needed community gardening equipment. This proposal was met with approval from most attendees. Even Patricia seemed to recognize that further resistance was futile, though she refused to meet my eyes for the remainder of the meeting. The next 5 days saw a flurry of activity as the sheds were emptied and then removed one by one. The HOA hired the same company that had delivered them to take them away. By Friday afternoon, my property was shed-free once again, though the ground showed evidence of their presence in the form of flattened grass and compressed soil. As promised, the HOA arranged for landscapers to restore the area, reseeding the grass and ensuring no trace of the intrusion remained. Gregory personally delivered a formal letter of apology signed by all board members, even Patricia and Karen, though I suspected they'd been highly reluctant signatories. The following Tuesday, I received notice that an emergency election had been called to fill 2 vacant positions on the HOA board. Patricia had resigned as president, citing personal reasons, and Karen had also stepped down. The email included a note encouraging me to consider running for one of the positions. I thought about it seriously. Perhaps it was time to get more involved in community governance, to help ensure that the HOA served the interests of all residents rather than enabling power trips and personal agendas. I submitted my candidacy that afternoon. 3 weeks later, I was elected to the board along with Gina Nelson, who had been vocal in supporting my position during the shed controversy. At our first meeting, Gregory was selected as the new president, and a new era of more transparent, collaborative HOA management began. As for Patricia and Karen, they remained in the neighborhood but kept a notably lower profile. I occasionally saw Patricia walking her dog, her expression souring whenever our paths crossed. Karen seemed to have redirected her energy toward her garden gnome collection, which had taken over her front yard, ironically, in violation of HOA guidelines about lawn ornaments. The new board decided, in the spirit of neighborly accommodation, to grant her a special exemption. Sometimes, when I look out at the restored area of my property where the sheds once stood, I reflect on the strange battle that unfolded there. What began as an outrageous violation of my property rights ended up bringing positive change to our entire community. The incident had exposed problems in how the HOA operated and created an opportunity for reform. The experience taught me that standing up for yourself doesn't always have to result in burning bridges. By remaining calm, documenting everything, and finding creative ways to illustrate the absurdity of the situation, I'd managed to resolve the conflict without resorting to costly litigation. Even more gratifying was the sense of community that emerged from the confrontation. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves now stopped to chat when they saw me working in my yard. Several confided that they'd had their own issues with the previous board but had been too intimidated to speak up. 1 year after the shed incident, our HOA had transformed. Meetings were well attended, decisions were made transparently, and rules were enforced fairly and consistently. We'd instituted a proper process for community projects that respected private property rights while still encouraging neighborhood improvements. The Community Garden Program found a legitimate home on actual HOA common land, with proper storage facilities that weren't on anyone's private property. As for me, I eventually stepped down from the board after serving a 2-year term, satisfied that we'd established better practices and a more respectful culture. But I remained engaged in community affairs, hosting an annual barbecue on my property, yes, the same area where the sheds had once stood. It became something of a neighborhood tradition, a reminder of how we'd come together to address a common problem. In the end, those 11 garden sheds had served a purpose, after all, just not the one Patricia and Karen had intended. They'd helped us build a stronger, more equitable community, one where homeowner rights were respected and HOA authority was properly bounded by law and common sense. And if anyone ever tries to put unauthorized structures on my property again, well, I've still got the survey map ready.